All right, everyone, to get this lesson kicked off, we're going to start with a brief video about the deep freeze that the state of Texas has been in for the last week while we were on winter break, and how that has affected the people's water supply in Texas. All right, so here we go.
Tonight, a still frozen Texas facing power outages.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 20.
And now, a water crisis. Nearly 7 million statewide without access to clean drinking water. Tonight, the White House declaring a state of emergency for Texas, Oklahoma, and other affected states.
Texans deserve answers about why these shortfalls occur and how they're going to be corrected, and Texans get those answers.
For the first time since Monday, power outages dipped below 1 million homes, with water lines frozen or busted, many getting desperate. Others lining up in sub-freezing temperatures, hoping for a chance at much-needed supply.
I'm trying so hard not to cry.
Lauren Ramos, the food and water are vital to help take care of her 3 kids.
I'm very stressed too with everything going on. It's hard, but I'm trying.
The situation right now is dire here.
Houston Fire Chief Samuel Pena says emergency calls have tripled. His crew's no longer fighting just fires, but low water pressure.
The water pressure was so low that we were unable to use the fire hydrants.
Patients at an Austin hospital evacuated overnight after it lost power and water. Online, help flooding in for those unaccustomed to sustained cold. Northerners sharing tips, like using melted snow to flush toilets. And in Houston, Chef Chris Williams serving up some help with a smile, feeding thousands at a warming shelter, promising hot meals to those still suffering from the brutal cold.
It exposes how fortunate we are to live where we do, to have running water, electricity, and having that taken away from you, it's extreme.
And tonight, this string of winter storms causing
All right, everyone, the main focus of that video was about the water shortage that Texans are experiencing right now because of the deep freeze and the very uncharacteristically cold weather temperatures that they're experiencing down there. So how important is water? And that's what we're going to be talking about in this lesson. So we're going to get started with our introduction, and here are our directions. Water is one of the most important resources in our society. We're going to answer the questions below sort of together, but not really, because obviously you can't interact back and forth with me in real time. So we're going to start with this question. Number 1, what do we use water for? Identify at least 5 uses we have for water in the space below. Now, if we were in school, if this were under normal circumstances, we'd be brainstorming this in class, and I'd be writing your brainstorm thoughts on the board, and we'd all be sharing this together. So what I've done is I've actually answered this question for you. I've listed out 5 uses. Excuse me. For you, so that we can continue to move on. I want you to have this short list here in mind, as we move forward. So 5 uses we use for water: drinking, cleaning, bathing, cooking, and we use it for farming and agriculture. So we use water to grow crops. Those crops are made into food, or we eat those crops. Question 2, how do you think that water gets to where we need it? How does it just show up in our sinks and in our bathtubs, and does it just magically appear in our faucets? No. There are wells. Wells are deep holes dug into the ground, and a pump is used to bring water up. There's a public water system, and it's hooked up to our indoor plumbing. So you turn on the faucet and water comes out. And we can also buy bottled water, and that's sold at stores. Obviously, it doesn't originate at the store. The water is bottled from a stream, probably goes through some sort of filtration process, bottled, labeled, and then shipped to the store. So water is our life source. We cannot do so much without water. Just hearing from that video how desperate people are for water for cooking and cleaning and bathing, they're desperate down there in Texas. So we are going to talk about the Neolithic Era. During the Neolithic Era, people stopped moving around and settled down in one place. Once people settled down in one place, they had to modify their environments to meet their needs. When humans adapt to or modify their environment, they change their behavior and change the world around them to meet their needs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read you this set of instructions and explain to you what I'm going to have you do in the Ed puzzle. Describe how the scenarios below are examples of humans modifying or adapting to their environment. So what you're going to see is an example in this column, and then this sentence starter. This is an example of humans modifying or adapting to their environment because. All right, so here's the example that we're given. The example of humans modifying or adapting to their environment was domesticating animals and creating farms to have a stable food supply. So, this is an example of humans modifying or adapting to their environment because by domesticating animals, humans were able to have a more stable food supply by being able to milk animals like cows, goats, retrieve eggs from chickens, or kill livestock for meat. Also, by creating farms, humans created another stable source of food by growing food instead of gathering it. So, as we continue on, what I'm going to give you in the Ed puzzle are these 3 examples of how humans modified or changed their environment to meet their needs. And then what I want you to do in the Ed puzzle is finish this sentence starter based on an example that you choose. So in the Ed puzzle, I'm going to give you these 3 choices, and I'm asking you to choose one of these examples to answer or to finish this sentence starter. And I'm going to have that in the Ed puzzle for you as well. So you're going to answer that in the Ed puzzle now. All right, in ancient history, humans realized water is their life source. They need to be near water. So when humans started settling and staying in one place, they settled near a water source. Well, sometimes that water source can also pose some really interesting challenges, like flooding. So here is an example of irrigation. The environmental problem was that there was unreliable access to water. So how are these humans going to get water? So, and follow the arrow over, early river valley civilizations modified their environments to create irrigation systems. And what I'm going to do for you right now is show you this brief video on what is irrigation.
That face that is usually covered by her phone has finally made an appearance.
Hi, I'm Emerald Robinson, and in this What Is video, we'll take a look at the agricultural technique known as irrigation. Irrigation is any means used by humans to bring water to the land. It can be as simple as using a garden hose to water a flower bed, or as complex as a system of pipes and canals designed to bring moisture to a desert. Irrigation is used wherever rainfall is either inconsistent or does not provide enough natural water to grow crops. It's estimated that about half of the world's land is irrigated. Humans have been using irrigation for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians used the Nile's annual flooding to water their farmland, while the Persians were one of the first civilizations known to use a series of wells and tunnels to move naturally occurring groundwater to specific plots of soil. There are many modern types of irrigation, but the 3 most common are flood or furrow irrigation, when water is pumped or otherwise carried to fields and allowed to flow over the ground. Drip irrigation, when water is sent to crops through pipes pipes that have holes in them. This method uses about 25% less water than flood irrigation, since less is lost to evaporation. And spray irrigation, in which water is pumped through pipes at high pressure through a nozzle. Because it requires electricity and wastes a significant amount of water, spray irrigation is becoming less popular. Although irrigation is necessary, it also causes problems. Irrigation uses a lot of water. About 39% of the water in the U.S. goes towards irrigating crops and is a major expense for farmers. The excess water or runoff from irrigation contributes to pollution by carrying dissolved salt and pesticide residues into the local water supply. Fortunately, computers are becoming more frequently used to sense where water is needed. This technology eliminates waste, lowers costs, and prevents damage to the environment.
Thousands of how-to.
All right, in the Ed puzzle, I'm going to ask you to answer 2 questions. Based on the video that you just saw, identify advantages and disadvantages to using irrigation in the Ed puzzle. You're not going to fill out the chart, but you're going to answer the questions in the Ed puzzle. All right, now we're going to look at some specific examples of irrigation in 2 different ancient civilizations, ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. So here is an irrigation system in ancient Egypt.
Egyptian agriculture also revolved around the Nile. In the earliest days, Egyptians relied solely on the river's natural flooding to irrigate the soil. Later, they developed more sophisticated irrigation systems. They dug a series of ditches to capture the floodwaters. When the floods receded, the water remaining in these shallow basins could be used to grow crops. Another important advance was the development of the Shadoof, a mechanical irrigation device that made it easier for farmers to bring water from the river to their fields. With a bucket at one end and a weight at the other, the Shadoof works like a seesaw. The bucket is lowered into the Nile, and the counterweight helps the farmer raise the bucket, which can then be poured into irrigation canals to water the fields. The invention of the Shadoof led to a dramatic increase in irrigated land. With these methods, the Egyptians grew a variety of crops. Grain, used to make bread and beer, was the main staple. Other food crops included onions, grapes, dates, figs, and pomegranates. Flax was grown to make clothing.
All right, so based on the video on irrigation in ancient Egypt, I'm going to ask you to answer this question in the Ed puzzle. Describe the techniques used by ancient Egyptians to meet their water and food needs, and then explain the effects of using these techniques on these civilizations. Now we're going to watch a video on irrigation in ancient Mesopotamia.
The Tigris and the Euphrates are rivers that surround Mesopotamia. The problem with being surrounded by rivers is that when there is a lot of rain, the rivers flood. In ancient Mesopotamia, people figured out that if they could control the river, they could water their crops, and they wouldn't have to worry about being flooded out of their homes every few years. They could also get water to their fields when there wasn't enough rain, so that their crops wouldn't die. First, the Mesopotamians dug wide canals that allowed water to flow from the river out to their farms. Then they dug smaller irrigation ditches from the canals to their fields to water all of their crops. They put gates on the ditches so they could control how much water went from the canal to the fields. Modern irrigation gates are made out of metal, but probably the Mesopotamians made theirs from wood. Once the Mesopotamians were able to control the flow of water from the river to their farms, they were able to grow more crops and harvest a surplus each year. Having a surplus made their lives easier. and gave the ancient Mesopotamians more time to have fun.
Now in the Edpuzzle, I'm going to ask you to answer the following question based on the video on irrigation in ancient Mesopotamia. Describe the techniques used by ancient Mesopotamians to meet their water and food needs, and explain the effects of using these techniques on these civilizations. To finish out this Edpuzzle, I'd like you to, for extra credit, answer this question by sending me an email. Now that we're starting to learn about some specific places around the world in this course, I want you to think about an area or a place that you would like to visit. It can be anywhere in the world. Maybe it's not even of this world. No restrictions. Money isn't a challenge. Where would you go and why? So where would you visit and why? Thanks, guys.